Hi, I'm Koller. I teach at Jerisha. This week we begin to read Parashat Terumah. And I say begin because we begin the second half of the book of Shemot. I think at this point it's fair to look at the trajectory that Bnei Israel have moved and to ask, have they really gone very far? They started the book of Shemot in slavery, working for one taskmaster, and now they get to Parashat Terumah having just gone through the experience at Har Sinai, gotten the laws, and are told that now the hard work begins. And they might have been thinking, certainly I think a reader should be thinking, have they just traded one taskmaster for another? Have they gone just from one servitude to another servitude? The beginning of the book of Shemot was all about the hard labor they performed for Paro. The end of the book of Shemot is all about the construction that they're doing for God. But besides the actual physical construction, which we're not told is very onerous, and I wouldn't suggest that it is, there seems to be a lot of rules. There seems to be a lot of obligations. One might even say bondage. And in fact, God calls them avadai, my servants, my slaves. For that reason, they can't be slaves to anyone else, but that seems to imply that in a real sense, they have just gone from one form of avdut to another form of avdut. That's a hard question, a tough question, but I think that the second half of Shemot, beginning of Parashat Terumah, gives us the answer as well. And the Chumash does that, the Torah does that, by not using the word avodah as the word for what Bnei Israel are going to be doing in building the Mishkan. Avodah is what they did for Paro, but what they do for God, what they do for Hashem in building the Mishkan is malacha. And malacha immediately, in the ears of any hearer or reader of Torah, immediately calls to mind the work of creation, immediately calls to mind Maaseh Breshit. And so Malacha immediately joins for us the building of the Mishkan with the work of creation that God Himself did at the very beginning of the Torah. And that's a connection that Chazal, of course, made in lots of ways, implicitly by making the laws of Shabbat dependent on the construction of the Mishkan, but also explicitly. Gemara on Brachot, on Daf Nun Hey, Rabbi Yehuda says that Betzalel, the architect, the constructor of the Mishkan, knew how to manipulate the Aleph Bet in the same ways that Shamayim and Aretz were created. So Chazal saw that there was a connection between Maaseh Breshit, at the beginning of Breshit, and Maaseh Mishkan, Binyan Mishkan, at the end of Shemot. In modern times, this was discussed also by Buber in his book Darko Shel Mikra, and he charts a whole bunch of connections between the beginning of Sefer Breshit and the end of Sefer Shemot. I'll just read a couple of the more striking ones. God saw everything that He had done, and it was very good. Buber says, sounds like the end of Maaseh Mishkan. Vayar Moshe kol hamalacha, v'nei asu ota kasher tzivah Hashem kein asu. Vayachal and vatachal, vayachal Elokim, vayachal Moshe. Lots of verbal idioms connect the building of the Mishkan back to Maaseh Breshit at the beginning of the Torah. The connection, though, also shows what's changed. In a real sense, God has now handed off the work of creation. He started it, He began the process, but He didn't complete it. He left one gaping hole in creation. He didn't build a house for Himself. He had no home. He said that has to wait. We saw Him go through failure after failure with Dor HaMabul, Dor HaPlaga, and so on, until finally in our Parsha He begins to find a home. He tells Bnei Israel, now it's your job to build me a home. The fact that Bnei Israel take over the work from God is, in a sense, a step forward. They've gained independence. They've gained autonomy. It's also a step with challenges. They now have to sanctify this work. God can't do it for them. Whereas Maaseh Breshit, Shabbat had started with Vayikadesh Oto, the Maaseh Mishkan ends with V'kidashta Oto. You have to sanctify it. It's now up to you. It's now incumbent on you to actually make this sacred work. The charge to us that the Mishkan gives is to be partners with God. That's a remarkable opportunity. God began this work. God began the Malacha. There was an interlude where you did Avodah. Now you're free from the Avodah. You can do Malacha as well. But that's a responsibility, to actually do Malacha rather than Avodah. Not to simply labor through life, but to actually produce, to be creative. To be partners with God is an opportunity that we have, but it's a challenge that we have as well. And our job is to take our time and to not use an avodah, not to serve human taskmasters, but to do malacha, to leave the world a redeemed place when we get through it. Shabbat Shalom.